Welcome to Breaking News to Trading Moves.
Today we're looking at a specific headline, some reports about a potential deal involving Verizon and EchoStar, and what that might mean for different parts of the market.
Right. Our focus is really on the market consequences, the potential winners and losers stemming from this reported negotiation over wireless spectrum.
Yeah, it's a focused look. We're examining what this one possible transaction could imply for carriers, for the infrastructure companies, and even out into the satellite communication space.
Okay, let's start right at the core then, the news itself. We're seeing reports initially coming from places like Bloomberg and Reuters suggesting Verizon, that's ticker VZ, is in talks to buy wireless spectrum from EchoStar, ticker SATs.
That's the gist of it.
So what specific spectrum are we talking about here? And I guess, why is it such a big deal right now?
The reports point towards the AWS-3 band. That stands for Advanced Wireless Services 3.
AWS-3. Okay.
And to really get why it's valuable, you kind of need to understand where it fits.
Yeah.
It's what we call mid-band spectrum.
Mid-band.
Yeah, it's specifically frequencies sort of around the 1755 to 1780 megahertz range.
Right.
And then also the 2155 to 2180 megahertz range, give or take.
That sounds very technical. Why are those specific numbers important?
Well, it's because that frequency range, that mid-band, it offers this sort of optimal balance for 5G networks that are being built out now.
Optimal balance, how?
Okay, think of it like this. Low-band spectrum, stuff like 600 megahertz, it travels really far, which is great for coverage, but it's relatively slow in terms of data speed.
Right.
Then you have high-band or millimeter wave.
Yeah.
Super fast, amazing speeds, but the signal is weak. It struggles to go through walls, even windows sometimes.
Okay, I see.
Mid-band, where this AWS-3 sits, is the compromise. It gives you pretty good speed, substantial data capacity, and it still travels a decent distance, providing reliable coverage.
Ah, so it's the workhorse.
Exactly. It's the real workhorse for building a nationwide 5G network that can actually handle lots of data reliably. So if Verizon gets this, they're basically buying more fuel for their 5G engine.
Okay, so for Verizon VZ, the motivation seems pretty clear. It's competitive, right? Is it just about matching rivals, or is there something more specific driving this?
Oh, it's definitely competitive, but it's multifaceted. They absolutely need it to bolster their mid-band 5G capacity, keep pace with others. They've already spent a lot on C-band spectrum recently.
Right, I remember that auction.
Yeah, so this AWS-3 would complement that C-band nicely, but beyond just mobile phones, this is really, really critical for their fixed wireless access business, FWA.
FWA. Okay, tell us more about that, because that seems like something the listener, might directly connect with, home internet and all that.
Precisely.
Yeah.
FWA is Verizon's home and small business internet service that's delivered wirelessly over their 5G network. It bypasses the need for a cable or fiber line coming into your house.
Got it.
And the success of that whole FWA business model really hinges on having enough mid-band spectrum capacity. If they get more AWS-3, they can potentially serve more FWA customers in a given area, offer them faster, more reliable speeds.
And compete better with the cable company.
Exactly. It lets them scale up what could be a very profitable business line for them.
Yeah.
And frankly, they probably can't scale FWA the way they want to without more of this kind of spectrum.
Okay, that covers Verizon's angle. Now let's flip it. EchoStar, SHES. Why would they sell this spectrum if it's so valuable for 5G?
Well, for EchoStar, it looks like the main driver is financial. It's about deleveraging, cleaning up the balance sheet.
How does selling spectrum do that?
Think of these spectrum licenses as assets on their books. But if they aren't actually using them to build a network and generate revenue, they're just idle assets.
Yeah.
Capital tied up. Selling those licenses is the most direct way to turn that non-producing asset into cold, hard cash, liquidity. And that cash can then be used to pay down debt.
And this isn't the first time EchoStar has done this, is it? Feels like we've heard this before.
No, definitely not the first time. It seems to be part of a pattern. EchoStar has been selling off spectrum bands pretty methodically. We saw them do a big deal with AT&T, ticker T, previously. And there have been other sales, some involving players like SpaceX too. So yeah, this consistent activity suggests that monetizing these spectrum assets to reduce debt is a key part of their strategy right now.
Is there a timing element here? Why might Verizon be pushing for a private deal now instead of waiting for, say, an auction?
Yeah, there's likely some competitive timing pressure involved. Word on the street is that more AWS-3 spectrum might be coming up for a federal auction, maybe sometime next year.
Yeah.
And public auctions, well, they can turn into bidding wars. Prices go up. By negotiating directly with EchoStar now, Verizon could potentially lock down this capacity before that auction happens.
Ah, so they preempt the competition.
Potentially, yes.
Uh,
Secure the spectrum now, maybe at a better price than an auction, and strengthen their network position before rivals get another shot at similar bands.
So the picture emerging is Verizon needs capacity, especially for FWA and general 5G. EchoStar needs cash, wants to deleverage. This deal, if it happens, seems like a logical fit for both.
It does seem to align motivations, yes. And if it goes through, it immediately impacts the competitive landscape.
Okay, that sets things up well. Let's move into analyzing those market consequences then. Who potentially comes out ahead here? Let's identify the likely winners if this deal goes through, starting with the wireless carriers themselves.
Well, the most obvious potential winner, assuming the deal closes, is Verizon, VZ.
Right.
They get that immediate boost in mid-band capacity. That should translate pretty directly into, potentially better network performance for their customers and, critically, more capacity to grow that FWA business we talked about.
So it just accelerates their current strategy.
Pretty much. It's fuel for the fire they've already started.
Now, the analysis also mentioned AT&T, ticker T, as potentially being positioned favorably here, even though they aren't buying this particular block of spectrum. How does that work? How are they a winner?
Yeah, it's a bit indirect, but AT&T, too, could be seen as benefiting because this potential Verizon deal sort of validates AT&T's own earlier moves. Remember, AT&T already did a big spectrum deal with EchoStar for similar AWS-class spectrum.
Ah, okay, I see where you're going.
So when a major competitor like Verizon reportedly steps up to buy more of that same type of spectrum, possibly at a substantial price, it reinforces the idea that AT&T's prior investment was strategically smart.
It confirms the value of what they already hold.
Exactly. It highlights the value and maybe the scarcity of that AWS-3 band. AT&T already has a good chunk of it, so this market activity reinforces their own competitive position and the value of their existing assets.
Let's dig into the technical advantage for a second. You mentioned earlier that more AWS spectrum helps lower the cost per bit. Can you explain what that means for the carrier's finances?
Yeah, this is pretty fundamental to carrier economics. Think of spectrum as lanes on a data highway. If a carrier like Verizon adds more lanes, more spectrum to their existing network infrastructure, they can handle more data traffic much more efficiently. Or they can handle the same amount of data using less power or fewer physical resources per bit.
Or efficient.
Right. That efficiency gain translates into a lower operational cost for delivering each gigabyte of data. That's the lower cost per bit. If Verizon's network becomes, say, 20 or 30% more efficient in handling data volume because of this new spectrum, their profitability on data services, including FWA, can improve.
Which makes those high-volume services like home internet more viable financially?
Precisely. Better efficiency strengthens the business case, especially for FWA. All right, that covers the buyers. Let's pivot to the sellers again, specifically Section 2.B in our outline, spectrum sellers and balance sheet repair. Let's talk more about the financial mechanics for EchoStar, SATs, and maybe Dish too.
Okay, so for EchoStar, SATs, and you often see Dish, ticker DISH, mentioned in the same breath due to their history and intertwined assets.
The core mechanism is converting those spectrum licenses, which are valuable but maybe not being actively used, into cash. As we said, if the company doesn't have the billions needed for the capex to build out a network on that spectrum, the license is essentially frozen capital.
An unproductive asset.
Exactly. Selling it unlocks that value, turns it into liquid cash they can use right away.
And how does that liquidity specifically help EchoStar? What are the tangible benefits?
Well, number one, as mentioned, is debt reduction. These companies often carry significant debt loads, so using cash from asset sales to pay down debt is a major plus for their financial health.
Deleveraging.
Deleveraging, yes. Second, the cash provides flexibility. It could potentially fund necessary investments in other parts of their business, maybe upgrades to their satellite operations or funding partnerships, things they might not be able to afford, if the capital is still tied up in those unused licenses.
The analysis also mentioned regulatory compliance. How does selling spectrum help with regulations? That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, it relates to the FCC's build-out requirements. When a company gets a spectrum license, especially through an auction, the FCC usually mandates that they have to deploy a network using that spectrum, covering a certain percentage of the population within a set time frame, often several years.
Use it or lose it, basically.
Sort of. It's more like use it or face penalties or potentially have to return it. Meeting those build-out requirements costs a lot of money in network gear and deployment.
Oh, okay.
So if a company like EchoStar decides they can't, or strategically choose not to, meet those expensive deployment obligations for a particular band, holding onto the unused spectrum becomes a liability. They risk fines or losing the license altogether without getting paid.
So selling it offloads that obligation.
Exactly. They sell the spectrum, the buyer takes on the build-out requirement, and EchoStar converts a potential regulatory headache and financial burden into immediate cash.
Now, you brought up Dish, ticker Dish again. The reports specifically mention EchoStar in this negotiation with Verizon. Why do traders and analysts keep tracking both Dish and assets when these spectrum stories break?
It really goes back to the complex corporate history. Dish and EchoStar were once one company, then split, then had periods of Dish owning EchoStar again. Their assets, especially spectrum, have been historically intertwined.
Okay, a tangled history.
Very much so. So even if the negotiation is formally under the EchoStar entity, traders watch both because management strategies might overlap, finances could be linked, or a major move by one could signal or enable future moves by the other.
So they're seen as connected plays in the market, especially regarding spectrum.
Yeah, particularly when it comes to these core spectrum assets, the market tends to view them as closely linked.
All right, let's move to the next group of potential beneficiaries, Section 2C, the 5G build-out ecosystem. This is about the infrastructure layer, specifically the tower REITs. Who are we talking about here?
We're primarily looking at the big, publicly traded tower companies. Thanks American Tower, ticker AMT, and Crown Castle, ticker CCI.
The companies that own the actual cell towers.
Exactly. They own the physical steel in the ground, the rooftop sites, the small cell locations. Basically, the real estate that carriers like Verizon have to lease to put their equipment on.
So how does Verizon buying a spectrum license, which is essentially just frequency rights, translate into more money for AMT and CCI? What's the direct link?
The link is deployment. The license gives Verizon the right to use the frequency, but they still need to install the physical gear, the radios, the antennas, to actually transmit signals over that new spectrum.
You have to light it up.
Precisely. They have to light up that AWS-3 band across their network footprint where they want the capacity boost. And that means physically adding new equipment to the towers they already lease from companies like AMT and CCI.
Okay, and how does that generate revenue for the tower companies? There are a couple of ways, right?
Yeah, two main ways. First is through lease amendments. When Verizon adds a new piece of equipment, like a specific antenna for AWS-3, onto a tower where they already have a lease, they typically have to amend that lease because they're using more space, maybe drawing more power, adding more weight. That amendment usually comes with a higher monthly rent payment to the tower owner.
So more rent on existing leases.
Right. It's incremental revenue growth on their existing customer base.
Yeah.
Very reliable income. The second way is through increased demand for new leases or colocation. To really get the most out of mid-band spectrum, especially in denser areas, carriers sometimes need to add more cell sites closer together. That's densification.
Building new sites or adding equipment to towers they weren't on before.
Exactly. Or adding their equipment to a tower where another carrier is already present. That's colocation. Both scenarios mean more demand for tower space, driving new lease signings for AMT and CCI.
So anytime a carrier like Verizon rolls out new spectrum, it's generally good news for the tower companies.
Yeah, it's a pretty direct tailwind for them. More equipment means more rent, driven by long-term contracts. It's a core part of their business model.
Okay, that gives us a good view of the potential beneficiaries. Let's flip the coin now and look at Section 3, competitive dynamics. If Verizon gets stronger, who feels the pressure? Let's start with direct rivals facing renewed mid-band pressure.
All right. Here we're thinking about competitors like T-Mobile, ticker TMUS, and also some of the regional carriers, maybe like US Cellular, ticker USM.
T-Mobile, TMUS, has been widely seen as having the lead in mid-band spectrum, mostly because of all that 2.5 gigahertz spectrum they got from the Sprint merger.
That's correct. They have a substantial lead there.
So if Verizon successfully adds this AWS-3 capacity, how does that specifically challenge T-Mobile? Does it erase their lead?
It doesn't erase it entirely, no. T-Mobile's 2.5 gigahertz holdings are vast, but it does potentially narrow T-Mobile's advantage, especially at the margin in certain key markets.
At the margin, meaning specific areas or situations.
Yeah, think high-traffic urban or suburban areas where Verizon can quickly deploy this new AWS-3 alongside the C-band they already have. T-Mobile has built a lot of its marketing and reputation on having the superior mid-band network and speeds.
Right, the 5G leader narrative.
Exactly. If Verizon closes that perceived gap in network performance in important areas, It could put pressure on T-Mobile. They might feel compelled to increase their own network spending, their CapEx, to stay ahead, or maybe get more aggressive with promotions and pricing to defend their market share.
So it forces T-Mobile to react, potentially impacting their spending or margins.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It challenges that clear network superiority claim they've relied on.
And what about smaller regional carriers like US Cellular, USM? How does this affect them?
For a regional player like US Cellular, the pressure could be even more intense. They're already competing against the huge scale and marketing budgets of the national carriers.
It's already a tough fight.
Right. So if Verizon significantly boosts its network capacity and performance in regions where US Cellular operates, that competitive gap widens. It just makes it harder for USM to compete on network quality or speed.
Does it affect other aspects like roaming agreements?
It could. Stronger network economics for the big national carriers like Verizon can also shift the dynamics in wholesale negotiations. It might become harder for smaller regional players to get favorable terms for things like roaming onto Verizon's network when their own customers travel.
Okay, so pressure on multiple fronts for the smaller guys. Let's move to Section 3.b, the impact on cable MVNOs. We're talking Comcast, CMCSA, and Charter CHTR. The analysis suggests they face pressure from stronger host economics if Verizon gets the spectrum. Explain that. How does Verizon getting more efficient potentially hurt companies paying them for network access?
Yeah, this one requires understanding the MVNO relationship. Comcast's Xfinity Mobile and Charter's Spectrum Mobile are mobile virtual network operators. Right. They handle the branding, billing, customer service. But the actual wireless connection, the signal to your phone, relies primarily on leasing network capacity from a major carrier.
Yeah.
And for both Comcast and Charter, in many of their key markets, that underlying network host is Verizon.
Okay, so they are effectively Verizon's wholesale customers.
Or in large part, yes. They rely heavily on Verizon's radio access network, the RAN.
So where does the squeeze come in if a Verizon gets more efficient spectrum like AWS-3?
The squeeze potentially comes later, during contract renewals. It's about negotiating leverage. As Verizon uses this new spectrum to improve its network efficiency, lowering its own cost per bit, as we discussed, their underlying cost structure for providing that wholesale service improves. Now, their current contracts with Comcast and Charter are likely fixed for a period. But when those deals come up for renegotiation...
Verizon has a stronger hand.
Exactly. Verizon can argue, look, our network is better, faster, more capable now, thanks to these investments. The value we provide is higher. They gain more pricing power. They might demand higher wholesale rates or less favorable terms from Comcast and Charter.
And since Comcast and Charter need that Verizon network access for their mobile services,
they might have little choice but to accept terms that are less advantageous than before. That directly pressures the profit margins on their mobile businesses. They need those mobile offerings to be financially attractive add-ons to their main cable and internet services.
So Verizon's efficiency gain becomes leverage that could potentially squeeze the MVNO margins for CMCSA and CHTR down the line.
That's the potential dynamic, yes. It's an indirect consequence of Verizon strengthening its core network economics.
Okay, that makes sense. Finally, let's look at Section 3.c, satellite-to-cell challengers. This involves companies trying to connect phones directly via satellite, like AST SpaceMobile, ASTS, and maybe Iridium, IRDM.
Right. These are companies working on non-terrestrial networks, aiming to provide connectivity, often in areas where traditional cell service doesn't reach.
So why does Verizon getting better terrestrial network capacity challenge these satellite players? Aren't they targeting different markets, like remote wilderness or oceans?
They are targeting those remote areas, yes, but there's often a significant overlap in the potential market, especially in what you might call fringe areas, underserved rural zones, places just outside current reliable coverage.
Okay.
The challenge comes from the boundary of terrestrial coverage expanding. If Verizon, using this new AWS-3 spectrum, can push reliable 5G service just a few miles further out from towns or along highways,
then that area is no longer a target market for the satellite guys.
Precisely. The total addressable market, or TAM, for these direct-to-device satellite services shrinks every time the terrestrial network improves and expands its reach into those fringe areas. The viability of companies like AST SpaceMobile often depends on capturing a sizable market that needs their solution because there's no alternative. A better, denser terrestrial network reduces that immediate need for consumers in marginal coverage zones.
So essentially, Verizon improving its ground game raises the bar for the satellite players.
Absolutely. Better terrestrial speeds and reliability, thanks to spectrum like AWS-3, set a higher expectation for performance and potentially price. For satellite solutions to compete for consumer attention, even in remote areas, they now have to offer a service that's compelling compared to an ever-improving terrestrial option, even if that option is still miles away.
It makes the satellite value proposition tougher.
It does. It increases the competitive pressure on them to deliver a truly necessary service at the right price point. We should also probably mention that EchoStar itself, the seller here, has its own history involving spectrum deals related to space and satellite communications, which adds another layer of complexity to that whole non-terrestrial competitive landscape.
Right, the whole space is quite dynamic. Okay, that brings us towards the end of our analysis.
Yeah.
Summing it all up, what's the core takeaway for someone listening about this potential Verizon-EchoStar deal?
I think the main takeaway is just how critical and valuable this mid-band spectrum is right now. This reported negotiation really highlights that. You see capital moving EchoStar potentially turning an unused license into cash, and that capital potentially translates directly into competitive advantage and network capability for the buyer, in this case, Verizon.
It affects everything from service quality to company profit.
Yes, from the speed on your phone, potentially, to the economics of home internet via FWA, to the revenue of tower companies, and even the competitive footing of emerging satellite networks. It's foundational.
And a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe ponder. With Verizon reportedly moving to acquire this AWS-3 spectrum before a potential federal auction, how might that influence the bidding strategies of AT&T and T-Mobile when those future auctions do happen?
Right. Does Verizon taking this block off the market now make the remaining spectrum even more valuable? Does it force others to bid more aggressively later?
That dynamic will certainly be worth watching. The competition for this crucial mid-band spectrum is clearly far from over.
Absolutely. It remains central to the telecom competition story.
Okay, before we wrap up, we need to state clearly, this analysis is based purely on reported information. It should not be taken as financial advice or as a recommendation to buy or sell any of the stocks or securities mentioned today.
That includes Verizon, VZS, EchoStar, SATES, AT&T, Dish, American Tower, AMT, Crown Castle, CCI, T-Mobile, TMUS, US Cellular, USM, Comcast, CMCSA, Charter, CHTR, AST Space Mobile, ASTS, or Iridium Communications, IRDM.
The content presented here is purely our opinion and analysis based on those reports.
Thanks for letting us walk through these market dynamics with you.
And thank you for listening to Breaking News to Trading Moves. We'll talk to you next time.